everyone, and welcome to Badan Warisan Malaysia's talk series. Today's topic is Cameron Highlands, the making of Malaysia's largest hill station. And our speaker today is Enzo Sim. And just for a little housekeeping, if you have any comments, please feel free to type them out in the chat box that you will see on the right-hand side. And if you have any questions, please type them in the Q&A box. You're also free to type in your questions in the chat box too, which we'll share. So I'd like to welcome our speaker for today, Enzo. And Enzo is a history and international politics researcher, and he's had a long time interest in the field of Southeast Asian history. He's a former staff writer for the Penang Institute, and he was known for publishing various articles in the Penang Monthly, as well as on items on key historical events in Penang and Malaya, as well as on historical backgrounds of forgotten historical sites in Malaysia. He has a passion for documenting the history of Penang Hill, and he's also been responsible to draft the historical contents of the funicular railway gallery at the Penang Hill Gallery, following his appointment by the Penang Hill Corporation as a member of the Penang Hill Gallery Consultative Panel. After concluding his stint at the Penang Institute, he went on to join Joe Siddick Productions, where he curated and drafted the contents of the KL Story Permanent Historical Gallery in Central Market, KL, as well as the Buku to Books digitized historical archive exhibition in collaboration with the US Library of Congress and the British Library during the KLW KND Festival 2021. And he's also been in charge of planning the Jawi Peranakan exhibition during the Peranakan Festival of 2021. His hobbies include collecting stamps, old books, as well as old Malayan banknotes. So without further ado, welcome Enzo, and please begin your talk. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar. I'm really happy to see so many of you sparing your time today in this beautiful Saturday morning to actually join in this talk. So today I'm going to talk about the Cameron Highlands. So perhaps before we go into Cameron Highlands, we should first know the concept of hill station. So during the colonial era, the British has created a series of hill stations, starting from the Penang Hill, or known as the Great Hill at that time in the 1788. And this was followed by the Maxwell Hill, or what we call the Bukit Larut today in Taiping in 1880, in the 1880s. And they moved on later on to focus on the Titiwangsa mountain range, which is known as the backbone of the Malayan Peninsula, with its rising hill slopes and the ridges. So they subsequently founded the Fraser's Hill in 1919, and they concluded with the foundation of Cameron Highlands in the 1920s. Now, Cameron Highlands is a unique case in this particular hill station history, because it is the largest, the large-scale hill station, the largest hill stations among all of the hill stations that I've just mentioned. Now, it is not just limited to the British who created the hill stations, but we also see, for example, in during the French colonial period in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as well, during the French Indochina period, where the French has created the highlands in hill stations in Vietnam, for example, like Dalat, and then in the south and up in the north, you have Tam Dao and also Sapa. And in Cambodia, we also see the Bokor Hills as well. So to really start off, and today we're looking at Cameron Highlands. So to really start off the journey of traveling back into time, into the early years of Cameron Highlands, I think it is imperative for us to travel back into 1884, which is a very important year in the foundation of Cameron Highlands. So in this year, Sir William Cameron, who is a colonial government surveyor and geologist, was sent on an expedition to discover and also map the unmapped regions of the Ulu Pahang, or what the geologists at that time called the hinterlands of Pahang, which was largely undiscovered virgin jungles, million-year-old tropical forests. Now, following the expedition that lasted from 1884 to 1885, Sir William Cameron addressed a letter, written a letter, and addressed it to the governor of the Straits Settlements of that time, Cecil Clementi Smith, in which he retold his journey while discovering the lands of Pahang. So over here, this is a very important text, which later on many people would quote as the foundational evidence of Cameron Highlands. Now, over here, he described the Telom Valley and its surrounding lands as a sort of vortex in the mountains. While for a wide area, we have gentle slopes and Pama land, and etc. in his own words. So Pama in Malay is basically a plateau or a tableland that is surrounded, closed in by lofty ridges. So this single text is often quoted by many, even until today. When you come across travel brochures in Cameron Highlands, tourism brochures, they will always quote this single quote report by Sir William Cameron as being the fact, the evidence that he spotted the Cameron Highlands. However, an interesting case over here is that this isn't the case at all. So why? Now, in this next slide, you'll come across a sketch map that was published in 1931 in the Journal of the Malayan branch of the Royal Asiatic Society, which shows the location of the Cameron Highlands over here, if you see my cursor, as well as the rivers and mountains in Pahang. Now, so why wasn't it the case that Sir William Cameron discovered Cameron Highlands during his expedition in 1885? Well, the first one who actually really looked closely into the case was by John Brooke Scrivener, who was the first government geologist to be employed by the Federated Malay States administration in 1903. Now, as Sir William Cameron, according to J.B. Scrivener's theory, now as Sir William Cameron was gazing across the horizons of the Telom Valley from the peak of Gunung Chali up in the north, if you can see the map over here, Gunung Chali up in the very north, which he ascended during his 1884 to 1885 expedition. The area which he referred to cannot possibly be the tableland, which we now call Cameron Highlands, which was originally known as the Ulu Bertam among locals before its development. Now, simply because the view from Gunung Chali towards the south over the Ulu Bertam area is blocked by the Gunung Irau and also Gunung Batu Berincang towards the south. So the land that we now call Cameron Highlands is further away in the south, and in the middle you have the Gunung Irau and Gunung Batu Berincang, and up in the north you have Gunung Chali, where Sir William Cameron ascended during his expedition. So you have two huge mountains blocking the way. So this is further reinforced by the fact that Sir William Cameron clearly traveled down the Telom River up in the north, just down the Gunung Chali, as reflected by subsequent description of his journey down the plains of Pahang after he discovered the mountainous area and the Titiwangsa mountain range in this case. So in the next slide, you can see that in the it began with early unofficial expeditions in the 1900s. So in the 1900s, you saw the beginning of growing interest by the British colonial government to actually start off exploration trips to map the regions within what we today call as the Cameron Highlands. Now, the first Europeans to penetrate into the thick vegetation of this area includes Herbert Christopher Robinson, who is a renowned British zoologist and ornithologist, who was also then the director of museums of the Federated Malay States, as well as another fellow British zoologist, Cecil Bowden-Claus, who was then working under Robinson himself and would later on be promoted to the post of the director of the Raffles Museum in Singapore from 1923, serving until 1932. Now, in this picture on the right, you can see Cecil Bowden-Claus during his expedition to the Dutch New Guinea from 1912 to 1913. Now, Dutch New Guinea is the modern-day Papua region of Indonesia. Now, in this, the first trip ever recorded, unofficial trip made by Cecil Bowden-Claus and also Herbert Christopher Robinson was in December 1906. Now, in this year, Robinson and John Book Scrivener together, they began exploring the Lubuk Tamang area. So if we go back to the map earlier on, so they discovered the Lubuk Tamang area, and after reaching the area, which can only be accessed via the abandoned earthwork of the road that began in Tapa, down in the foothills of the Cameron Highlands, they started their trip by exploring the ulu of the Batang Padang River for a couple of days, where they stumbled upon a magnificent pool filled with tapa weed orchids, known as the Laut Tinggi locally, a very rare species of wild orchids. Now, subsequently, they proceeded to cross over the divide into the Lubuk Tamang area, where they camped overnight in an abandoned hut. Now, the Lubuk Tamang area is the core of the Cameron Highlands, to be honest. So the Lubuk Tamang area is today known as the Tanah Rata, and then we have Ringlet and a few other townships in Cameron Highlands. So back then it was known as the Lubuk Tamang. And by the end of that expedition, which eventually led them up to Gunung Berembun, under the guidance of several local indigenous tribesmen, or what we call Orang Asli, of the Sakai group, it was already clear to Scrivener and Robinson that the river on which they traveled along was the Bertam River, not the Tolom River way further up north, which was the path taken by William Cameron in his 1885 expedition. Now, also as recorded by Scrivener in his one of his books known as the Recollections of Cameron's Highlands and Fraser's Hill, another expedition venturing into the Lubuk Tamang area with the objective of reaching Gunung Irau was spearheaded by Robinson, Cecil Bowden-Claus, and Henry Ridley, who later on introduced the rubber trees into Malaya. Now, this expedition started in 1908. It's a second unofficial expedition that wasn't sponsored by the government. So, remarkably, having set their sights upon reaching Gunung Irau, it was also during this expedition when Robinson and Bowden-Claus crossed over into the area further up north, finally arriving at the plateau where Cameron Highlands is located today, before reaching the slopes of Gunung Batu Berincang. So these early unofficial expeditions that wasn't sponsored by the government really opened up the curiosity of the government level of the government officials of the colonial government to actually explore the area and develop a hill station. So by now you would have asked, like, so if it's not Cameron who really discovered or stepped foot on Cameron Highlands, then why was his name? Why does his name remain in the term Cameron Highlands? So it was because now it was his expedition, even though he didn't really discover or step foot in Cameron Highlands. It was his expedition that sparked the curiosity of later government expeditions to actually explore much clearly the area that was undiscovered, because Sir William Cameron only spotted what we today know as the Blue Valley, a region that surrounds the Kampong Raja up in the north of today's Cameron Highlands. So even though he didn't really discover the core of the Cameron Highlands or step foot on it, but he sparked the curiosity of many people, and later on led to the foundation of Cameron Highlands. So that is why his name still remains there, honoring him, yeah, because of this contribution. So with the conclusion, a successful conclusion, I would say, of the first unofficial expedition, the first two unofficial expeditions, the government finally stepped in. The Federated Malay States government held the very first government expedition in 1922. So when it comes to deciding who to lead the expedition, it was actually Sir George Maxwell himself, who was then the chief secretary of the Federated Malay States government, who sponsored the expedition. He was the one who wanted to lead the expedition, but he was unavailable at the very last minute before the expedition. So the burden of the expedition, the responsibility of leading on the expedition, really fell onto the shoulder of Herbert Christopher Robinson, who earlier on led the two very successful unofficial expeditions into Cameron Highlands. So at this time, the government has realized the area's potential for development, and so this expedition is really to assess, its aim is really to assess the climate, the health conditions, the topography, the soil, geology, and other features of the highlands to assess whether the Cameron Highlands is really suitable to be made and designated into a hill station for a holiday retreat and other purposes such as agriculture. So under the initiative of Sir George Maxwell, the expedition includes is led by Robinson and includes W.M. Sands, who is the economic botanist, Dr. H.P. Hacker, who is the medical entomologist and scrivener himself, lasting from August to September in 1922. Now, so because of his unavailability to lead on the expedition, Herbert Christopher Robinson eventually took on the expedition, and he really placed a lot of effort in terms of assessing the climate and the soil as well, the soil quality as well in the Cameron Highlands. Now, at the conclusion of the first government expedition, we saw it was followed by a second government expedition, this time led by Sir George Maxwell himself. Now, George Maxwell has earlier on put in the effort into the establishment of Fraser's Hill. He took particular interest in the development of hill stations, starting from Fraser's Hill, which he saw as his own baby, technically, which really started off in 1919. Now, so he took on the opportunity again, as expected, in this venture to open up Cameron Highlands. So in this second government expedition, we saw him took over the leadership of the expedition, and at the end of his expedition in 1925, he reported favorably about the Cameron Highlands and concluded that the Cameron Highlands is a very suitable place to be developed into a health resort, an agricultural hub, and also a holiday retreat for British officers and so on. Yeah. So at this time, you will question, like, so why choose the Cameron Highlands when you already have Fraser's Hill, when you already have Maxwell Hill and Penang Hill? Now, Penang Hill is, in the case of Penang Hill, it is much further up north, which is very far from, considering the lack of modern transportation at the time, is considered quite a far location away from Kuala Lumpur, which is then the administrative capital of the Federated Malay States. So a lot of the government officials would find it tedious to travel up to Penang Hill. The same goes to Maxwell Hill, which is today known as the Bukit Larut in Taiping. The transportation is not that convenient as well. Now, Fraser's Hill is developed because it has convenient access for people living in the Kuala Lumpur region, in the Klang Valley region, where the core of the Federated Malay States power lay in. So why Cameron Highlands then? Because Fraser's Hill at that time, many people had found that the policy, the colonial government policy in Fraser's Hill that prioritized the allocation of government rental bungalows towards government officials and their immediate families is a very discriminative policy for many civilians, European civilians that lives in KL. Now, Fraser's Hill, just like Cameron Highlands, they were built using public funds from taxes that civilians pay as well. So many find this to be utterly discriminatory and utterly unfair for most of them. And moreover, Fraser's Hill, many people come to realize later on that Fraser's Hill's cramped and constricted size could no longer allow any further developments or expansion. So naturally, they set sights upon Cameron Highlands to be the next large hill station. Now, we are looking at the early developments starting from 1926. So in this year, the Cameron Highlands Development Committee was formed with the objective of supervising and directing development projects, beginning with the construction of the metal road from Tapa to the Highlands, which was laid out upon the basis of a rugged, brittle path opened in 1904. Now, the most important thing, the most important task, I would say, that the development committee undertook was the construction of the Tapa Road, which is still in use today for everyone going up to Cameron Highlands from the southern region of Malaysia. Now, the Tapa Road was built in 1926 by the Cameron Highlands Development Committee using literally manual labor with ox carts and basically with axes hacking off the trees along the way, which was a very tough job considering the lack of modern technology at the time to cut down the trees. So when this road was finished, which opens up vehicle traffic from the lowlands up to the Cameron Highlands, major infrastructure developments soon followed. So at this time by 1932, the Pahang government have decided to step in. So when the Pahang state government took over the development of the highlands, they constructed more access roads and paths. So following the completion of Tapa Road, it was important to lay out an access path, proper roads leading to the private bungalows and also places like vegetable farmlands and the tea plantation, which was starting to spring up following the opening up of Cameron Highlands. Now they've cleared several designated areas as well in the jungles for future development and installed, most importantly, a water supply system to provide fresh water to local residents. And by 1935, it has already been reported that there are 50 bungalows and dwellings dotting across the hill, and also numerous vegetable small holdings ran by Chinese farmers, and a beginning of tea plantations measuring 280 hectares at that time. So following the completion of all the access roads, the facilities, and the most important of all, the water supply up there, the Cameron Highlands started to take shape as a holiday destination, a true holiday destination that is favored by a lot of the British expats living in Malaya at that time. So back in the days, one of the most popular activities in the Highlands is none other than golfing. Now, laid out in the town of Tanah Rata in 1935, there is a golf course right in the middle of Tanah Rata Township. And as you can see, it started off as a 9-hole golf course and was the main source of entertainment for visitors. And interestingly enough, in the early years, up until the 1950s, it was very normal for golfers to spot tiger paw prints on its greens, because at the time when the tiger population wasn't that endangered as we see today. Tigers were roaming freely, especially at night, in search of their prey. So as you can see in this old photograph, really, the middle, you can see the clear plains over here is the 9-hole golf course, and you can see it's surrounded by many important bungalows. Now, fronting it over here, if you can see that there's a long terrace house over here. This is actually today the Cameron Highlands Resort. Now, this old structure was burned down in 1977 and was later on turned into the famous Merlin Hotel, which was a chain of hotel that has presence in Penang, in KL, run by Lim Fu Yong. Now, only the well, fortunately, only the middle part, which is the wooden terrace, that was burned down. And the structure on your right, the white building, is today the Jim Thompson Suite at the Cameron Highlands Resort, and you can still book a room and stay inside it to experience the history. And because of the prominence of the golf course and as a source of entertainment for many people, a lot of private bungalows, significant buildings that are built in its mock Tudor structures are built surrounding the golf course. Now you can see as the amenities began to be built more completely across the highlands, you can see you start to see the construction of bungalows and lodging houses from 1933 up to 1937. So in 1933, it was the year where when the Cameron Highlands Resort was founded. Cameron Highlands Hotel at that time, it was known initially. Cameron Highlands Resort was only the name that was bestowed upon it when it was refurbished in 2008. Now, on the left, you can see the original picture of the Cameron Highlands Hotel that was built in 1933. But as mentioned, this structure unfortunately was burned down in a major fire that broke out in 1977 and is later on rebuilt again. And you can see the modern structure at the Cameron Highlands Resort. Now, this was built in 1933 and saw many VIPs from the colonial government staying in this hotel. And then on the right, you have the smokehouse, the Ye Smokehouse Inn, that is quite a prominent property and a very well preserved mock Tudor structure in the Cameron Highlands. Now, this is together with the Royal Selangor Club. This is one of the few remaining mock Tudor architecture in Malaysia that dates back all the way to the British colonial era. So this Ye Smokehouse was built in 1937 by a man called William J. Waring, who is a public relations firm owner in Singapore. And he himself used to be a rubber planter back in the early days in the 1920s. Now he decided that since the Highlands is open for visitors, there needs to be, and as the main visitors are all British, there needs to be a respectable lodging that has all the fittings such as running hot and cold water and an actual fireplace inside there to serve and cater to the needs of visitors to the Highlands. So many of its original features, such as the fireplace and its architecture, still remain in place, intact perfectly up to today. So apart from being a holiday destination, the Cameron Highlands really was also a spot for an important destination for education because of this woman, as you can see on the right-hand side of the slide. So she is actually Anne Griffith Jones. Now she arrived in Singapore in 1921 to visit her brother, who was then working in the civil service in Singapore. And on her first visit, she fell in love instantly with the tropics, with the Far East, basically. So she decided to stay on, and eventually founded the Tanglin School out of the disused supper shed at the Tanglin Private Recreational Club, which is still in function today, in 1925. Now, it really became a success story following the foundation of the Tanglin School in Singapore, which started only from 12 students in there. And at its peak, the school housed almost 300 students with 20 teachers inside the Tanglin School. So in 1934, she decided to look for a more suitable place to open up a branch of the school to provide the students with a healthier environment, free from tropical diseases that were rife during the early days of Malayan history, such as malaria, which has no cure at that time. And so in 1934, she established the Tanglin boarding school in Tanah Rata, which provided education to children up to the age of 13. So this is basically a boarding school where boys and girls live together in the dorm and have classes in the daytime. And she believed that the high altitude and cool climate, as many British believed at the time as well, were deterrents of tropical diseases such as malaria. So the school instantly became a hit among Europeans because of that reason. However, few years later, in 1942, World War II broke out, and in 1942, the Japanese took over the administration of Malaya and occupied it for 3 years and 8 months. So during this time, the Cameron Highlands was not spared from the atrocities of the and brutality of the Japanese occupation too. So the Imperial Japanese Army eventually set foot in the Cameron Highlands in 1942. And instead of leaving, Griffith Jones decided to stay back together with her teaching staff. And they were all sent by the Japanese to the notorious Changi prison and later on transferred to the Sime Road camp in Singapore. Now, inside the, despite being in prison, she didn't give up teaching. She organized teaching classes inside within the prison, operating out of the prison. And this was later on a factor that led to the very high regard and high respect that her students and the people in Cameron Highlands and those who know her in Singapore has shown her throughout her life. Now, she and her staffs eventually survived the harsh internment, and after coming out of the liberated from the prison camps, Griffith Jones reopened both schools in Cameron Highlands in Singapore. Now, but the school in Cameron Highlands, even though it was opened up again in 1947, it was forced to close due to the outbreak of polio within the school compound. Now, after the settling of the polio cases in 1947, by 1948, she managed to reopen the school again in December. But as we all know in the history of Malaya, the middle of the year in 1948, the Malayan emergency has broken out with due to the insurrection of the communist insurgents in Malaya in 1948, starting from the shooting, the murder of the European planters in the Sungai Siput estate in Perak. So by December 1948, the Malaya was in the grips of the Malayan emergencies, and a lot of security measures were required to be undertaken by Griffith Jones to protect her school children. As seen in this photograph, for example, where she waves off her students who were leaving the Cameron Highlands boarding school in a heavily escorted military convoy to protect them from the increasing number of the Malayan communist insurgents surrounding the highlands, because the highlands is basically a virgin jungle. It naturally became the hotbed and a hiding place for many of the communist insurgents and was considered to be a black area during the Malayan emergency. Black area and white area being the categorization of safe areas and unsafe areas that are infested by communist insurgents during the administration of Sir Gerald Templer as the High Commissioner, the British High Commissioner in Malaya. So it was the security situation deteriorated and became so bad that in February 1949, she decided, concerning about the safety of her school children, she decided to close down her school in Cameron Highlands temporarily in February 1949 to open up 4 temporary schools in Penang Hill, in Ipoh, in KL, and also in Singapore, where it was deemed to be a safer environment for the school children. So a few years just after the closure, the temporary closure of the school, she was allowed once again, after 6 months, to be honest, to return to Cameron Highlands to restart her school, to reopen the school, in other words. Now, however, by 1951, she thought that the responsibility of ensuring the safety, of guaranteeing the safety of her school children was too great. So because of that, she reluctantly decided to transfer the administration of her school to the British security forces in that year. Now, it wasn't the end of education in the Highlands, to be honest, but it was merely the closure of Tanglin School, which is seen as her invention because she was the one who established the school. But this led to the opening of the very famous Slim School as well in the same year, which was entirely run by the British forces and only caters to the sons and daughters of the British Armed Forces, of the Commonwealth forces that served in Malaya, and it remained in operation until December 1964. Now, the name Slim School was actually named after Field Marshal Viscount Sir William Slim, who was a high-ranking British general at that time. So, as you can see in this newspaper, she bids farewell to her schools, and this was a news cutting that featured the story of her personal story and also the story of how she founded the Tanglin School and how it was time at that time to close down the school and pass over the administration of the school to the British security forces. Now, as you know, the first 4 years of the Malayan emergency, the British was almost at a losing side. In 1951, you have the assassination of Sir Henry Gurney as well. So at that time, the risk was too high, and that was what prompted her to close down the school eventually. And the Malayan emergency would eventually end in 1960 in an official stance. So apart from education, holiday destination, it is also incomplete. It will be incomplete to talk about the history of the Cameron Highlands without the mentioning of the tea plantations in the Highlands. So this has to do with the vision of a trader, of a tin miner, who was already very prominent in Kuala Lumpur and in Ipoh in particular as well. Now his name is John Archibald Russell, or more fondly known as J.A. Russell. So before venturing into the tea business, he was already a prominent planter and miner from a prestigious Russell family in Malaya. Now he first mooted the idea of growing tea in the valleys of Cameron Highlands when it was still in its early stages of development. So it really began with humble beginnings. It began with the arrival of Russell's father, John, or better known as Jack among his family members, or Fuzzy Russell because of his fuzziness. So that was his nickname that they only know him for as well. So John Russell arrived in 1890 in Malaya, being appointed as the government printer, and was in charge of setting up the first printing office for the Selangor state government. And today the printing office can still be seen in across the Dataran Merdeka in the corner beside the old building of the Chartered Bank, which was the first bank in Malaya. So it was just opposite. It is located right opposite the Sultan Abdul Samad building. Now when he came over here, he brought his sons together, and this includes J.A. Russell, John Archibald Russell, who was at that time only 8 years old when he arrived in Malaya on board a ship in 1890. So beginning in 1927, J.A. Russell started to study the feasibility of planting tea in Malaya, because he realized, as a trader himself, he realized that the economy of Malaya was entirely dependent on tin mining and also rubber plantation. So in the event of an economic crisis, both of these commodities would pose a danger to the economy of Malaya, and at that time was nearing the Great Depression era. So tea was seen by him, but thanks to his visionary insights, to be the next commodity which Malayans can invest and diversify their economic revenues. So he started off by applying for a large land concession with A.B. Milne, who was a veteran tea planter from Ceylon, which is today Sri Lanka. So together with A.B. Milne, they've applied for a large land concession that measures up to 6,000 acres from the colonial government, because they have seen the potential of the fertile valleys of the highlands. Now, coupled with its temperate climate, which is entirely suitable for the plantation of tea. Now, as you can see in the photographs, you can see like the works that they've undertook to clear the virgin jungles in order to plant the tea plants, tea bushes across its slopes. And then we saw, because of his effort and his contribution, we saw the birth of Bow Plantations. Now, in 1929, Bow Plantations, which was established by John Archibald Russell himself, formed the first large-scale tea plantation in the Cameron Highlands. It was carved out from a huge swath of virgin jungle, as shown just now in the photographs. Now, the plantation first started off from the Fairley estate before expanding towards Habu, and later on in the 1950s in Sungai Palas. Now, the Sungai Palas plantation was largely the work of the hard work of the late Tristan Russell. Now, Tristan was the one who had the vision of expanding the tea business empire of Bow Plantations, and it was because of his vision that there was the birth of the Sungai Palas plantation as well. He first arrived in Malaya in 1948 during the Malayan emergency at the age of merely 22 years old. And he recounted a lot of interesting stories, among which includes having to sleep at night at the wooden bungalow known as the Moor Gaps bungalow in the estate in Habu, with a pistol right underneath his pillow every night because of the fear of the communist insurgents that are known to have been hiding across the hills and the ridges within the forests of Cameron Highlands. So running the plantation is a major affair and a tedious one. So a lot of the Tamil laborers from southern India form the predominant labor force that are employed to pluck the tea leaves, although there were also a small percentage of Chinese and Sikhs. So these laborers, they took up residence in their own estates across within the tea plantation because of their sheer huge number of these laborers. There were shops, there were the existence of shops and schools that educate their sons and daughters as well, all within the tea plantation. So at the conclusion of this talk, really, we have seen the rise of Cameron Highlands from the very early years in the 1920s, and we have seen how it has played an important role in agriculture, in education, and also as a holiday retreat for many of the British expats, and today locals, domestic tourists as well. So really thank you to all the audiences here that are present together with me. And yeah.
Thank you, Enzo, so much. I mean, the pictures from the olden days are just amazing, and the stories are so informative as to how everything began. I would like to ask a question though. When the tea plantations started in the 30s, do you know what kind of tea was being planted and where they were from?
Yes, definitely. So the first tea plants that were planted in the Bow plantations, they were brought all the way from the Bohia Hills, all the way from the district of Nanping in Fujian province. Now, the Bohia Hills is its English name because it was developed as a hill station as well in China. And Bohia Hills in Chinese terms will be known as Wuyi Shan or Wuyi Mountains. So, and there were also theory that that talked about how it is possible, it is highly likely that the Bo tea itself, the brand, the namesake of Bo, actually derives from the Bohia Mountains as well, because Bohia Mountains is known for its exquisite tea of exceptional quality. And the very first tea shoots that were transferred or migrated from migrated into the Bo tea plantations in Habu and the Fairley Estate was from the Bohia Mountains, and later on they brought shoots as well from Sri Lanka and India. Yeah.
I have a question here from Hyung Hong Po, and his question is: do you think it's appropriate to use the word discover to refer to the Europeans' explorative activities in Cameron Highland, with or without the sponsorship by the colonial government?
Yeah. So the I would say the Europeans, if we define the word discover, now it wasn't really the Europeans who first discovered the area, because it was already settled by the Orang Asli, the Sakais, but it was the efforts that are made by the colonial government to map the region, to study its topography, that led to the birth of the current modern hill station that we have today. So to really say who discovered it, I wouldn't say it was the Europeans who discovered it, but in a way they discovered the hill station. So they were the ones who undertook the planning, the town planning of the hill station, and they were the ones, although they are not the laborers, they brought in a lot of Tamil laborers who really worked on the construction of the roads and all. Although they are not the ones who went down the ground to do all the dirty work, but they were the ones who actually laid down the foundation to make the hills a hill station. Otherwise, the hill today will remain as a virgin jungle. Yeah, to be honest. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, so following up to that, he also said, okay, in your research, did you encounter any stories of the Orang Asli and how they register memories of the place? And also, how did the colonial exploration and exploitation of Cameron Highlands impact the natural environment and ecological system of the place, such as the population, the lives of the Orang Asli and the population of the tigers?
Now, yeah, so to answer that question, certainly the development of Cameron Highlands has certainly put a toll on the Sakai and other Orang Asli populations that are originally living in the highlands. However, to what extent, I haven't really looked into it to what sort of extent, but certainly it did pose certain adverse effects towards displacing them, perhaps to the in the hinterlands, to further inwards into the hinterlands of Pahang. And for the tiger population, yeah, certainly it has the British during the early years, because the tiger population was so many of them were roaming freely across the highlands. The British has embarked on hunting expeditions where they hunted down tigers. You can see them doing taxidermy on tiger on the I mean, based on the reason of researching them and so on. And they've also like made the tiger heads as decorative pieces in their homes, maybe above the fireplaces. So certainly I do acknowledge that the effects and the threats that it has posed to the Sakai population and also the wildlife tiger population as well. Yeah.
There's a question from Kanesan. You mentioned that there was a fire in the 70s. Do you know why that was?
I think it's probably a fire that perhaps started from the fireplace itself. So the reason wasn't clear, to be honest, but however, considering that the entire terrace of the Cameron Highlands Hotel, as you can see in the earlier slides, it was very prone to fire. Well, fire spreads quickly across wooden structures like what we see in the early years of Kuala Lumpur as well, and that is why you have brick fields and which manufactures bricks under the efforts of Kapitan Yap Aloy and also Frank Swettenham to turn all the wooden houses here in KL into brick structures, yeah, to save it from the risk of fire. Yeah, so the fire broke out in 1971, and it was like rebuilt into its modern structure and was taken over as the Merlin Hotel, yeah, run by the conglomerate of Lim Fu Yong, yeah, an entrepreneur.
Okay, there's a question from Ryan Ko. How did the Sultan react to the British making Cameron Highlands into a hill station?
So because at that time the Sultan only has as a protected state, the Sultan only has the authority. Sultan Al Pahang only has the authority over Malay customs and also Islamic affairs. The Sultan, even though he has like negative reactions to it, there wasn't really much thing that he can do, as he was he had to listen to the advice of the British resident that was stationed in his palace and so on. And regarding to this, there was an interesting story that one of the old employees of the smokehouse we told during my early visits to Cameron Highlands. So in my interview with him, he recounted an interesting story of how in the 1950s, there was it has been in place for a very long time. So up until the 1950s, the rule was still there, and that rule is that non-whites or Asiatics, as the British term most of us at that time. So non-British, non-Europeans are not allowed to step foot into establishments like the Cameron Highlands Hotel and also the smokehouse. They were not welcome. So he recounted an interesting story where in the 1950s, the late Sultan Abu Bakar of Pahang was admiring the flowers in the lawns of the Cameron Highlands Hotel, and one of the European managers eventually came out and told him to go away, basically rush him away, and only later on to realize that he was the Sultan of Pahang, and to which the manager apologized profusely. However, that incident I think demonstrates how even though like the locals didn't really like much about all these discriminative policies, but being a British colony under the whims of the British administration, we couldn't do much at that time. Yeah.
I have a question here from Natalie. How did the famous strawberries first come to be grown in Cameron Highlands?
So this one dates back to 1925, when the British, during the second government-sponsored expedition in 1925, led by Sir George Maxwell. So at the conclusion of the expedition, they've also established an agricultural station in Tanah Rata, which is still in existence today and is known as the MARDI in its abbreviation, referring to the Malaysian Agricultural Research and Development Institute. Now, this agricultural station was set up at the conclusion of the second government expedition in 1925 by Sir George Maxwell to experiment with all sorts of plants of all sorts of species, ranging from tea leaves, the tea plantation. So the very first tea plants that were experimented was actually there. Now they experimented with the growing of tea, with the growing of strawberries as well over there, and the growing of all sorts of vegetables and the temperate climate flowers. So that is how and when they really started to bring in strawberries and found that, oh, it's a place which is compatible to the mass growing of strawberries. Yeah, I hope that answers your question. Yeah.
Okay, another question from Kanesan. Does Pahang have roads to Cameron Highlands apart from the current Simpang Pulai and Tapah Road?
I think yeah, there is. The one that leads all the way from Guamusang, if I'm not mistaken. Now there's another that other roads also connects Cameron Highlands all the way to Fraser's Hill. Now it's a very windy road. I think it takes a longer time, more than both the Simpang Pulai road for people traveling out from the north of the peninsula, and also the Tapa Road all the way from the south of the Malayan Peninsula. But the oldest road remains Tapa Road, the road which early explorers took, and where it is still accessible for traffic right now.
Okay, there's a question from Afzal. He'd like to know if Charles C. Reed, the government town planner, had any involvement with any of the planning of the towns in Cameron Highlands.
Now, he was only involved in the planning of the Kuala Kubu Baru's township, because you mentioned his name, and I remembered him as the town planner that really came up with the concept of Garden Town. Now, I'm not sure if he's involved in the planning of Cameron Highlands, but through my research, his name hasn't appeared in any of the archives that I've gone through. But certainly he was prominent for his town planning efforts in Kuala Kubu Baru, which became really the first garden town of Malaya. Yeah, and it's still a very charming town today in Kuala Kubu Baru. Yeah.
I remember you mentioned about the golf course that was built in Tanah Rasa in
Yes.
1935. Does it still exist, and is it still like a 9-hole course?
Yes, it is. So, when it was built in 1935, it was a 9-hole golf course. It started off as a 9-hole golf course, but today it has been expanded into an 18-hole golf course, and is still there, perfectly landscaped, and is situated across the Cameron Highlands Resort. And also is another prominent address next to it is the Smokehouse Hotel as well. It's a very scenic place where one can still enjoy golf, although without spotting tigers, of course. Yeah. To me, there are some slight differences, but not to the extent of which one is colder than which. But to me personally, I would say Cameron Highlands is certainly colder because of the the existence of features such as the mossy forest, for example, which is a million-year-old forest that is covered with moss, and that is formed because of the high level of moisture and the temperate climate as well. And I would say, I mean, compared with Genting Highlands, Cameron Highlands as the older hill station, a more well-preserved hill station surrounded by jungles, it is, I would say, colder than Genting Highlands in many ways. Yeah.
With climate change, is there a threat of warming temperatures in Cameron Highlands?
Yeah, there is, because I think back in the days, the early days, even during my visits to Fraser's Hill as well, not just Cameron Highlands, a lot of the original residents who were born and raised there, they started off. I mean, they didn't know anything about like the need of having refrigerator or fridges in their household, because the weather was so cold that the vegetables and the poultry meats can be left outside without the possibility of rotting or going bad. But as time goes by, the temperature rises, and today, like especially during this season, the Raya season, you go up to Cameron Highlands, you can feel the heat during the daytime, especially, which wasn't the case back before the 1980s. But right now, with climate change, we see not just the rise of temperature, but also unexpected huge amount of rainfalls, which led to a lot of landslides. One particular one was in Habu, which closed off the access road that leads to the Boti estate in Habu. So and a lot of, I think, not just climate change that is threatening Cameron Highlands, but overdevelopment as well, and most importantly, unchecked and unregulated development by a lot of greedy developers across the Highlands, rushing to build condos and hotels or Airbnbs. Yeah.
Are there any more questions from our participants? Yeah. All right. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and thank you very much, Enzo, for giving us such an incredible and wonderful talk. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Yeah. Thank you, everyone.
Okay. We've got the last poll if you're interested to take part. And I would like to thank everyone again for participating. Badan Warisan Malaysia is an NGO, and we do not receive any financial support from the government. If you have enjoyed this webinar and wish to donate to us, the information is on the screen, and it is 100% tax exempt, so you can get a tax receipt for it. Be a member, join us, and receive news on our activities. And we are planning more events and members trips, including one to Cameron Highlands later this year. Please follow us in our social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, as well as Twitter. Please visit our website as well for more information. Thank you, everyone, again for participating, and we wish you a wonderful weekend ahead.